Hi everybody. Welcome to week 2 of the course, CRJU 302, Policing. We are, this week we're opening up with the chapters. First chapter is very introductory. It'll talk about discretion, rule of law, and the different models of policing, and then has a discussion about the different agencies that work within the criminal justice system. Let's first talk about what your assignments are going to be this week. This video is going into 2 different classes, so we'll talk about both of the assignments here. First first discussion is, or first class I should say, I will have a discussion board on the rule of law. Important topic in today's world, and you'll hear about it a lot from different directions. Here I've given you 2 different definitions of the rule of law. One comes from the book, one comes from lecture materials. One of these is very much how we hoped the rule of law would be. One gives you a footprint for how the rule of law should be. So I want you to look through the discussion board and try to identify which is which, and then talk about those about that as your primary issue. Second is the other class will be doing a written assignment on due process versus crime control. Really timely. There's one direction of the country that would push really hard and has pushed and has been very successful with crime control. The other section of the country is considering the concept of due process. So in this discussion board, I want you to look at a couple different things. The first is what the definition of both are. Second, as you consider the definitions, think about the practicality, because one is, what is going to be difficult to continue with or to establish, just because of some practical matters that we need to consider. And then also the concept of one will, depending upon who the author is, one talks about how one deprives people of constitutional rights. And ponder that for a bit, because that's if you think about it, just isn't true. And the reason I don't think it's true is because any defendant can go to trial whenever they decide, right up to the point of pleading not guilty or pleading guilty to a crime. So from arrest, an arraignment, person can plead not guilty, can maintain that, and through counsel, whether it's public defender or private counsel, begin to explore that idea. Now, that's something. And then the idea is too that one of the models rejects basic constitutional rights. Again, depending upon the author. So, got some things to look at in both of those things. For the discussion board, let's talk about practical matters for you. The first is make sure that you do an initial post by the due date that covers the information and has some outside thought to it and outside resources. I don't want you just parroting back what the book has to say. Second thing is make sure that you post your initial post and each of your follow-up posts are on different days. Students really struggle with this idea, and I've tried a whole bunch of different ways to make it plain, so we'll try it a different way. Make sure that you post on different days. If you post an initial response and then more than 2 posts, that's fine. We just need to see you cover them on different days. The first 3, the initial post and the 2 follow-up posts. Make sure those are on different days. Uh, and I get pretty strict on that. And going to this extent here, I'll probably be very strict on the first time around. Hopefully, will be watching these recordings at least the first week, and then we'll see what happens. See how valuable you find them in the future. Now, the next thing to think about is the written assignments. Written assignments, APA, face page, the formatting for the headers. Make sure that you are doing in-text citations and that you provide a reference page. If you have trouble with APA, or if you're just in the beginnings of 110 trying to figure out how to do all this, go to Purdue, P-U-R-D-U-E, Purdue OWL. It's the University of Purdue's online writing lab. Really good resource for APA. Left-hand side of the homepage, drop down, you'll see APA formatting. Then it's broken down into subcategories for you to go directly and to try to figure out how to do stuff. And then there's a good example page, of how to do APA formatting in a short paper. Papers, I don't expect abstracts. So don't worry about an abstract. Make sure that you otherwise format properly. And actually an abstract will end up costing you because you'll be doing time doing the abstract and taking up workspace. Okay, so those are the writing assignments. For writing assignments, if you go over a touch, don't worry about it. Just remember, these eyes are old, and you may have to. You can help me by making sure that you don't run too long. So, with all that, this week, the introductory chapter. The things to think about from here are the idea of social control, and I'll wait for my clock. Yes, it is 6 o'clock on Sunday night. If you look at social control, you're going to see that there are two types of social control that function in any society, in any organization, and that's formal and informal. The formal social controls are the ones that we're going to deal with here, which are the government, the police, and courts and corrections. Formal social control. Informal social control, the home, the church. Interesting to think about the importance of the church in modern life and where that is. You know, a couple hundred years ago in a city of any size, I would suggest most everybody went to church on Sunday, and many more often than that. I don't think that's quite the case anymore, which is an interesting proposition. So, informal social control, informal social control. We'll talk much more about that next week, and you'll probably have an assignment regarding that next week. Second thing to think about is this concept of the rule of law and what the rule of law means. Again, as I said before, there's pretty much two definitions of it, and I want you to ponder both of those definitions. Make sure you understand them, because you could very well see things on those again in the not so distant future. Then the last major topic of importance here is crime control versus due process. Struggle with that. This country struggles with that. And when things seem to be going well in one fashion, pendulum will swing one way. It's pretty much reached its height of one direction and is coming back more and more towards another direction. And you can see unintended consequences from both. And I want you to think about those unintended consequences. Because they're important to think about. And then the idea that we're going to talk about hopefully will be the practicality of one or the other. The last thing this chapter talks about are the different levels of law enforcement. Remember, federal government has multiple agencies that have enforcement powers, in multiple different agencies that have police powers, and multiple different organizations. If you're considering, and a lot of you mentioned it, you're considering the federal government for employment after school, take a good look at the minimum qualifications, and that will help you as you prepare. The FBI right now is tough to get into. A woman from these classes that had a really good background of internships and other contacts and relationships within the FBI. After several years, she went to Michigan State Law, a very well-respected law school, graduated from Long Beach, went to Michigan State Law, did internships at the federal level in a lot of different places, and then she finally got hired by the FBI, but not as an agent, but as a crime analyst. So, interesting thing. She's still hoping at some point to actually become an agent. So make sure you know what the minimum qualifications are. On the state level, the state government has multiple different enforcement agencies through DOJ, and everything from B&E, Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement, to the Franchise Tax Board, to alcohol control, ABC, alcohol beverage control, and bunches of others. The county level, you'll see the sheriffs. It's important for you to note, and we'll talk about it later in the book, how one gets to be the sheriff, and then how one gets to be a deputy sheriff, and understand the political basis of that. Local agencies will be police departments, and and how that structure works there. We'll talk about recruitment and hiring the last week, not really like the way that's done in this book, because I'd like to see that earlier so we could spend some really good time on it, because it's going to be important for many of you when you look to get hired, is to know how to get hired, what to expect, what's the process, what do I need to make sure I don't screw up on. So, it's the end of the book, so it's not going to be as broad as it could be, I guess is the way to put it. So with that, about 13 minutes, 14 minutes for this. Hopefully I can do similar and keep your weekly tapes short so that you don't have to spend a lot of time listening to me talk as much as, of course, I think that's magnificently important. In any event, hey, we'll see y'all in class.